Hi there. I just wanted to take you through an example of working on a song here. And it's just an example that applies for this one song. This isn't necessarily even a typical workflow. There's elements of it that may be typical, but nothing specifically that you can go away and say, yeah, that's a formula. Because you should always sort of do whatever the song calls for to be made. You know, it's calling out at you all the time, trying to have you find it, and I'm still searching. This is a work in progress right now. So this came about in my very, very rough, messy workflow style. You know, I'm crossing stuff out and I'm demoing possible words in, and forevermore I'm calling it so far. And it based off these two chords kind of playing against each other. Don't worry about the chord notations and that. I've wrote these down really roughly right now, but they're correct naming for the positions they're in. I haven't worried about making sure all of that sound at the moment. Okay, so I mean these two sound nice together, and then basically these two later on, which appear different, are basically the same shape, but you play more strings and then they resolve on an E suspended flat 6. So yeah, really, really messy workflow. This is how I work, and I'm constantly shifting and I can't decide on things and I'm scrolling things out. But the initial process, before we even got to this chaos, because you can imagine what it looked like before this chaos. This is more organized chaos, okay? So at the beginning, it's just sitting with a guitar and doing these two chords, yeah? And then going into the second position, E. And by going into that E, you make that conscious decision to take that E instead of, say, for example, an open E. And by going into that second position E, you're kind of using a brighter tone to the overall notes. You're using higher versions of those notes, yeah? So you're conveying a brighter tone. But the other reason is that my plan on this one, and again it applies here, is that I wanted some ground room, some low end to go down into at the end. I wanted to resolve on a very, very final E and just drop on like an open E after I've been using this higher position E, because then it will have more impact. So it will feel more like a resolution by going in on that low version of the E instead. You'll automatically know it's resolved. And all of this just comes from intuition, not from a training or any of that, just an artistic feeling. And you all have that, you know, and this is just mine being explained, really. And forevermore. I was going to call it like evermore just on its own, but then I got thinking of everlong, and that's no, and you're evermore, but then thinking about like Noel Gallagher and live forever and all this sort of thing. Even though this conveys a very sort of more personal, psychological. It doesn't necessarily mean like living in this life evermore, even, but it can do. But it's all angst, man. It's all existentialism with me a lot of this time. So yeah, I've even wrote here E second pos, just to tell me that this is what I'm doing, and this little D6 suspended to sharp 11. Like get into the chord formation at another time if I'm sort of like sitting with the guitar and working out the chords. But to look at it just as the sheet, when I was actually lyrically conveying how it might go on the acoustic guitar, just sitting there with the tape recorder, I'm just sort of singing any old rubbish, really, just to get the vocal, the melody across against the backdrop of the chords, the harmony of the guitar, yeah, because that's essentially what that rough sketch demo is doing. Especially when you can't read or write musical actual notation. You're just relying on recording it into something. So I was just singing any old thing and that sort of thing, yeah. And sometimes when you're doing that process, you might get the odd word or even line, if you're lucky, that actually comes out of somewhere out of the subconscious of the moment. And in that moment, you might say, "Oh well, that I'll keep that. I'll transition that into the product going forward. We'll use it." But here, not so much. That didn't really work out here. I didn't get anything that I could use for that. I scrapped it all of that gobbledy nonsense, and just started writing something here. So I thought I was happy with it. And sometimes you need to put these things down and just let them sit for a while in how you actually feel. Get a bit of distance from it. Give yourself time. So, roll back in time for a way to recombine the identifying pieces you knew were you. Okay, so we've got like a rhyme end there, and there's like a internal rhyme going on that line. So rhyme. Okay, here's a bit of imagery I break into. Past shattered shards, floating musical facades. Now what I did have, it did used to go to a time you felt alive and more real. Then it went unsealed. And I didn't like more real. To a time you felt alive and more real. It just felt clunky. It felt clumsy. More real. And then just unsealed. It's like that one word, unsealed, had to do a lot of melodic work. Unsealed. That sort of. It had to do a lot of work. So I thought, trying to put more words in instead. And I started playing with other things instead of alive and whatever. I was looking at like unpeeled and high-heeled and all sorts of other alternatives, and I couldn't justify anything like that. So I got rid of the eeled sound and dumped it because it's not needed. There's nothing up here that locks you into it needing it down here. So I scrapped it. It's making its own rhyme on its own line, in its own time. And to a time you felt alive and unbound. Suddenly a wild unbound appeared when you shook the grass, and the world was your own playground. So instead of that unsealed, I've gone with the world was your own playground.